A paper dropped in Science 2 days ago, and it's one of those papers where the implications are so large that you almost don't want to say them out loud. Because if this holds up, then one of the most fundamental assumptions in all of human evolution, an assumption that has guided decades of research and hundreds of expeditions, might be wrong. Not slightly wrong, geographically wrong. Wrong by about 3,000 kilometers. For over a century, there's been a story we tell about where we come from. It goes something like this. The earliest apes evolved in East Africa, Kenya, Uganda, the Rift Valley. That's where the oldest ape fossils are. That's where chimps and gorillas live today. That's where we found Lucy. That's where we found Homo erectus. East Africa is the cradle. It's the starting point. Everything flows outward from there. And the reason we believe this isn't arbitrary, it's because that's where we've been digging. And every time we dug there, we found things. Important things. The logic was self-reinforcing, and honestly, it made sense. Until someone finally dug somewhere else. In March 2026, a team led by researchers from Mansoura University in Egypt and the University of Southern California published the description of a brand new fossil ape. They called it Masripithecus moghraensis. Masr is the Arabic word for Egypt. Pithekos is Greek for ape, the Egyptian ape, and it is the first definitive fossil ape ever found in North Africa. Not a monkey, an ape, 17 to 18 million years old. Now, finding a new fossil ape is already a big deal. Ape fossils are incredibly rare. But what makes this one potentially paradigm-shifting is not just that it exists, it's where it sits on the evolutionary tree. Because when the team ran the analysis, combining anatomy, DNA data from living apes, and geological dating, this Egyptian ape came out closer to all living apes than any fossil ape of the same age from East Africa. Let me say that again. The ape from Egypt, the one nobody expected to find there, is more closely related to you and me and every gorilla, chimp, orangutan, and gibbon alive today than any of its East African contemporaries. The ones from the famous sites, the ones that filled the textbooks. If that placement holds, it means the common ancestor of every living ape, including humans, may not have lived in East Africa at all. It may have lived in northeastern Africa. Egypt, the Middle East, the crossroads where Africa was slamming into Eurasia. So how did we get here? And how confident should we actually be? Let's start with the fossil itself because it's important to understand what we're working with. Masripithecus is known from 2 jaw fragments and some teeth. That's it. No skull, no limb bones. 2 pieces of lower jaw from 2 separate individuals, found in 2023 and 2024. That's a tiny amount of material, and we should be honest about that up front. But in paleontology, teeth are gold. Teeth preserve better than almost anything else, and they carry an enormous amount of evolutionary information. The shape of your molars, the thickness of the enamel, the pattern of the cusps. These features are like a fingerprint for where a species sits on the family tree. And the teeth of Masripithecus are telling a very specific story. Its molars are low-crowned with thick enamel and rounded, heavily wrinkled surfaces. The jaw is robust, much heavier than you'd expect. The canines and premolars are unusually large. All of this points to an animal that primarily ate fruit, but could also crack open hard nuts and seeds when food was scarce. A dietary generalist, an adaptable creature built for unpredictable times. And the animal was about 25 kilograms, roughly the size of a border collie, or a small female chimpanzee. Bigger than the monkeys at the same site, definitely an ape. Now what's strange, and this is where it starts getting really interesting, is that the teeth of Masripithecus don't look like those of its East African contemporaries. They look more like apes that would appear millions of years later in Europe and Asia. It has features that resemble Middle Miocene Eurasian apes, species that lived 14 to 7 million years ago on a completely different continent. So anatomically, this thing is sitting between the older African apes and the later Eurasian ones. It's a transitional form, and it was found at exactly the geographic location you'd expect a transitional form to be, right at the junction where Africa meets Eurasia. The senior author, Hesham Salem, described it as a mosaic between older East African apes and later Eurasian apes. That is a loaded sentence if you understand what it implies. Okay, so let's talk about the place where this was found, because the location is almost as wild as the fossil. Wadi Moghra sits in the Qattara Depression in northern Egypt. Today, it is one of the most desolate places on Earth. Desert, 133 meters below sea level, the second lowest point in all of Africa. And the area is still littered with unexploded World War II ordnance, landmines, shells, relics from the North Africa campaign, 60 kilometers south of El Alamein, where some of the fiercest battles of the war were fought. That's one of the reasons nobody's been looking for fossils there. It's genuinely dangerous. But 18 million years ago, this place looked nothing like it does now. It was a subtropical coastal estuary, rivers flowing into the sea, mangrove forests, seasonal tropical woodlands. And the fossil record from this site is almost absurdly diverse. They found 6 species of hippo-like animals called Anthracotheres, more than anywhere else on Earth from that time period. Early elephants, crocodiles, turtles, storks, pelicans, giant flightless birds, monitor lizards and pythons, the oldest known occurrence of those two together in Africa. And in the water, sand tiger sharks, megatoothed sharks, relatives of great whites, tiger sharks, eagle rays. So picture the world of Masripithecus. This ape is cracking nuts in the canopy of a coastal forest while sharks are swimming in the estuary below. That was Egypt 18 million years ago. And there's a reason this location matters beyond the scenery. During the early Miocene, Africa and the Arabian Peninsula were still one continuous landmass called Afro-Arabia. They were separated from Eurasia by the last remnants of an ancient ocean called the Tethys. But the gap was closing. Arabia was drifting north, and by about 20 million years ago, the water barrier between Africa and Eurasia had been reduced by 90%. A land bridge formed, and once it did, animals started crossing, in both directions. Northern Egypt was sitting right at that crossroads, and if apes were going to get from Africa to Eurasia, which we know they did because we find ape fossils in Europe and Asia by 14 million years ago, they had to pass through this region. The question has always been, did they just pass through, or did they originate there? The team behind Masripithecus is arguing it may have been the latter. Now, to understand why this is so significant, you need to know something about the cast of characters that came before. The previously known early Miocene apes, species like Proconsul, Ikembo, Moghraensis, Afropithecus, these all come from Kenya and Uganda. They're between 17 and 24 million years old. They were among the first apes, tailless primates with some ape-like features, but they were still pretty different from modern apes. They couldn't swing from branches. They walked on all fours on top of branches like monkeys do. And on the evolutionary tree, they all sit below the common ancestor of living apes. They're on earlier, side branches. Masripithecus, despite being from the same time period, sits above them, closer to the line that leads to gibbons, orangutans, gorillas, chimps, and humans. A creature from North Africa, roughly the same age as these East African species, but phylogenetically more advanced. More closely related to us, and by the way, one quick side note, the most famous of those early East African apes, Proconsul, was named after a performing chimpanzee at the London Zoo called Consul. This chimp rode bicycles and played piano. Proconsul literally means before consul, as in the ancestor of a circus chimp. That's the kind of naming conventions paleontology had in 1933. Anyway, the phylogenetic analysis is where we need to get a little more detailed because this is where the claim lives or dies. The team used a method called Bayesian tip dating, which is a way of combining anatomy from living and extinct species, DNA from living species, and geological dates all into one model. It's sophisticated. And the primary result placed Masripithecus on the tree just below the split between great apes and lesser apes, very close to the common ancestor of all living apes. Then they ran a biogeographic analysis on top of that, asking the model where, geographically, the common ancestor most likely lived. And the answer came back: Northern Africa and the Middle East, not East Africa, not Eurasia. But and this is critical, the statistical support for the exact placement was described as moderate, not strong, moderate. And when they ran the same data through different analytical methods, the position shifted. One method put it inside the crown ape group, closer to great apes specifically. Another method put it on the gibbon branch. All three agreed it was an advanced ape, but they disagreed on exactly where among advanced apes it belongs. The authors themselves classified it as Incertacetus at the family level. That's a technical way of saying we know roughly where it goes, but we're not sure of the exact branch. That's honest science. That's what you want to see. But it also means the most dramatic version of this claim, the one where the ancestor of all living apes definitely comes from North Africa, that's not fully locked down. So let's hear from some outside experts, because the reactions have been interesting. David Alba, a paleontologist at the Catalan Institute of Paleontology, who wrote the official commentary in Science alongside the paper, said the findings confirm that paleontologists might have been looking for crown hominoid ancestors in the wrong place. He also noted that the geographic location was important, but not totally unexpected, since apes were already known from Saudi Arabia at slightly later dates. James Rossi from Stony Brook University said this verifies that our view of ape evolution in Afro-Arabia still has huge blind spots. But Sergio Almasija, also at the Catalan Institute, was more blunt. He called the biogeographic interpretation, and I'm quoting here, a bit far-fetched. He said he'd want to see far more complete fossils before updating mainstream ideas about the last common ancestor of living apes. Though he did acknowledge that any new fossil ape discovery is precious. And Ellen Miller from Wake Forest, who has actually worked at Wadi Moghra, said the find makes it tempting to draw arrows on maps, but cautioned that a new find like this is always the beginning of the work, not the end. So we have a real spectrum here. From this changes the paradigm to hold on, let's see more evidence. And honestly, both positions are reasonable. That's how science is supposed to work. Now here's something I find fascinating about the backstory. This was not an accidental discovery. The team didn't stumble onto this while looking for something else. They went to Moghra specifically because the math told them something was missing. Hesham Salem, the senior author, looked at the ape family tree and said, "There's a gap. Apes got from East Africa to Eurasia, but there's nothing in between. North Africa should have the answer." And then he spent 5 years looking for it. 5 years of searching in a desert full of World War II mines with a team from the first vertebrate paleontology program ever established in the Middle East. A program that Salem himself created, conceived at a dinner table in New York in 2008 when he was a visiting scholar. He said he had created an entire institutional identity without it physically existing. He lived in that dream for 10 years before it became real. The Mansoura University Vertebrate Paleontology Center, MUVP, was the first of its kind in the entire region. Before it existed, foreign teams would come to Egypt, find fossils and take them back to their own labs. Salem changed that. The first author, Shourouk Al-Ashkar, is the first person to earn a doctoral degree from MUVP. She initiated the ape hunting project at Moghra in 2021. And the moment of discovery has this great detail. She found a piece of lower jaw with a wisdom tooth and immediately recognized it as an ape. She went to Salem and said, "Dr. Hesham, we found an ape." Salem looked at it and got so excited that he forgot about a separate jaw fragment he had been holding in his own hands at that very moment. Just dropped it from his attention completely. Later, when Al-Ashkar was reading up on ape fossils, she remembered Salem's forgotten piece and asked around to see if anyone had photographed it. Someone had, and it turned out to be from the same species but a different individual. They doubled their sample size because someone happened to take a picture of a fossil that the lead researcher forgot about in the excitement of the other find. Now, I think it's worth putting this discovery in a larger context because it's not happening in isolation. Over the past year, there have been 2 other major findings that collectively are reshaping how we think about human evolution. In August 2025, a paper in Nature described 13 hominin teeth from Ledi-Geraru in Ethiopia between 2.6 and 2.8 million years old. Those teeth revealed a previously unknown Australopithecus species that coexisted alongside the earliest known members of our genus Homo, at the same place, at the same time. That means at least 4 different hominin lineages were living in East Africa between 3 and 2.5 million years ago. 4. not one leading to the next in a neat line, 4 separate species overlapping. Then in December 2025, another paper in Nature Communications reconstructed the face of a Homo erectus skull from Gona, Ethiopia, 1.5 to 1.6 million years old. And the face was weird. The brain case looked like classic Homo erectus, protruding brow ridge and all, but the face and teeth looked primitive, more like Homo habilis, an older, supposedly more primitive species. And the brain was only 598 cubic centimeters, small even for erectus. Yet this individual was making both simple Oldowan tools and early Acheulean hand axes. A supposedly primitive face attached to a supposedly advanced brain, making supposedly advanced tools. The categories were all jumbled. And now Masripithecus pushes the question back even further. 17 million years further, and to a completely different part of the continent. What all 3 of these discoveries have in common is that they break the simple story. The march of progress, that famous image of an ape gradually standing upright and becoming human, that was always an oversimplification. But now even the more sophisticated versions of that story are cracking. Evolution didn't produce one lineage in one place marching forward. It produced a messy tangle of species in multiple locations, with features mixing and matching in ways we didn't expect. And the geographic assumptions are falling apart too. We assumed East Africa was ground zero for apes. Maybe it wasn't. We assumed the key transitions happened in a specific corridor. Maybe they happened across a much wider area than we thought. One of the co-authors of the Masripithecus paper, Eric Seifert, said something that I think really captures the weight of this. He said, "For my entire career, I considered it probable that the common ancestor of all living apes lived in or around East Africa. But this new discovery and our new analyses now strongly challenge that idea." That's a senior scientist, decades into his career, publicly saying he was probably wrong about one of his most basic assumptions. That doesn't happen often. But, and this is important, he also added something more nuanced. He said the likelihood of the northern Afro-Arabian origin scenario doesn't depend on Masripithecus. The biogeographic modeling already pointed in that direction before the fossil was plugged in. What the fossil does is confirm the prediction. It fills the gap that the math said should be filled. That's actually a stronger argument than the fossil alone would be. The model predicted there should be something there, and then they found it. Now, I do want to be real about the limitations because I think that's what separates a good video from a clickbait one. This is 2 jaw fragments. That's the physical evidence. 2 partial mandibles and some worn teeth. No skull, no limbs, nothing about how this animal moved or how big its brain was. In mammalian paleontology, teeth tell you a lot, but they don't tell you everything. The phylogenetic placement has moderate statistical support. Not weak, but not overwhelming either. And it shifts depending on which method you use. 3 methods, 3 slightly different positions. All advanced ape, yes. But the exact branch varies, and in evolutionary biology, the exact branch matters a lot for the geographic conclusions you draw. Also, and this is a point that Sergio Almasiga raised, finding one ape in North Africa doesn't prove apes originated there. David Alba himself noted that apes had to pass through northeastern Africa to reach Eurasia. That's not controversial, but the region could have been a corridor, a place apes moved through, rather than a place where they originated. There's a real difference between those 2 scenarios, and this fossil alone can't distinguish between them. Miocene ape evolution is also notoriously difficult to reconstruct. During the Miocene, apes were everywhere. Maybe 50 genera, up to 100 species across Africa, Europe, and Asia. It was a planet of the apes in the most literal sense. Today, only 8 genera survive, including us. That's a catastrophic bottleneck, and many of those Miocene apes had mosaic features, mixing characteristics in ways that make building family trees extremely frustrating. Add one new species, and the whole tree can reshuffle. So where does that leave us? I think it leaves us in one of those moments where the old certainty is cracking, but the new certainty hasn't formed yet. We know that the story of ape origins is more complicated than we thought. We know that East Africa was not the only theater. We know there's an enormous unexplored territory across North Africa and the Middle East that could hold answers we haven't even imagined. And we know that when someone finally looked in one of those unexplored places, they found exactly what the models predicted they'd find. That last part matters, because there's something deeper going on here than just one fossil. It's about the way science creates its own blind spots. When every grant, every expedition, every career in paleoanthropology is oriented toward East Africa, that's where the discoveries happen. And when the discoveries happen there, it reinforces the idea that East Africa is where everything originated. The data confirms the theory, but only because the data collection was biased toward the theory to begin with. Shourouk al-Ashkar put it perfectly. The entire story of early ape evolution was told by only a small corner of the continent, and now somebody looked beyond that corner. In a desert full of landmines, on a shoestring budget, at the first paleontology center ever built in the Middle East, a team from Egypt found the first ape fossil ever from North Africa, and it's closer to us than anything from East Africa. There's something about that, about the places we don't look being the places that hold the answers, about an Egyptian researcher picking up a piece of jaw in the desert and saying, "This looks like us." If you want to stay on top of what science is uncovering about where we are,